In the middle of the night, on a wind-torn lake, Jesus reveals something about himself that the disciples had never seen before, but he does it in the strangest way possible. This is part 42 of our series, and we're exploring Mark chapter 6, verses 45 through 52. Look at verses 45 and 46 from the English Standard Version of the Bible. Immediately he made his disciples get into the boat and go before him to the other side, to Bethsaida, while he dismissed the crowd. And after he had taken leave of them, he went up on the mountain to pray. After feeding a multitude with 5 loaves of bread and 2 fish, Jesus sent his disciples away in a boat. When did he do it? Immediately, after the leftovers had been collected. Where did he send them? To Bethsaida. But which one? There are 2 towns called Bethsaida. Both are fishing villages, which is what Bethsaida means. One is near Capernaum, on the western shore of the Sea of Galilee, and the other is on the northeast shore. The Bethsaida on the northeast shore is especially interesting in Mark chapter 6, because it isn't governed by Herod Antipas, but by Herod Philip, the half-brother of Antipas, the former husband of Herodias, and the father of the dancing girl who asked for John the Baptist's head on a platter. That seems like too much to be a coincidence in the context of chapter 6. Why did Jesus send them away? At the beginning of the loaves and fishes story, Jesus wanted his disciples to get away from the crowds and rest, but the crowds followed Jesus to a deserted place. Now, Jesus sends them on without him, presumably, so the crowds won't follow them. And Jesus went up on the mountain to pray, alone. That sounds like Moses and Elijah. Hold that thought, while we move on to verse 47. And when evening came, the boat was out on the sea, and he was alone on the land. Mark tells us that Jesus and the disciples were still apart from each other when evening came, meaning when the sun went down. Jesus is on the land. The disciples are out in the boat, and it is becoming night. In the Bible, bad things happen in the night. The last time they were on the water at night, a storm tried to devour them, on to verse 48. And he saw that they were making headway painfully, for the wind was against them. And about the 4th watch of the night, he came to them, walking on the sea. He meant to pass by them. Jesus could see that they were making progress painfully. They were struggling to move forward. Why? Mark tells us that the wind was against them. The Greek literally says, the wind was in opposition to them, meaning that the wind was working against their progress. Then, in the 4th watch of the night, Jesus went out to them. Let's get the time frames sorted out. They started sailing when evening came, around sunset. The Roman night watch system consisted of 4 equal watches of about 3 hours each, beginning at sunset. So the 4th watch is roughly 3 a.m. to 6 a.m., depending on the time of year. The disciples have been struggling for around 9 hours and are still within sight of the land. The wind was really in opposition to their progress. Then Mark tells us that Jesus came to them, walking on the sea. Yes, that's exactly what Mark said, walking on the sea. And he also tells us that Jesus intended to pass by them. Here we have the most important phrase in the story. Just like in the feeding of the multitude, the phrase, like sheep without a shepherd, was the key. Here the idea of Jesus passing by the disciples is the key. Why? Because in the Old Testament, God revealed himself to his key leaders by passing by them as a means of inviting them into a deeper understanding and trust in him, to equip them for their mission. We can see God pass by Moses in Exodus 33:19-20, and he passes by Elijah in 1 Kings 19:11. Moses and Elijah are key figures in the Bible, representing the law and the prophets. So what? Why does this matter? The disciples have been called to ministry by the Messiah. But in the boat that night, they are like sheep without a shepherd, struggling, toiling, in danger and fear. But now, Jesus intends to pass by them, to reveal himself to them in such a way that they will understand his true nature and identity. Walking on the water is an extreme demonstration of his power over chaos. Look at Genesis 1:1-2. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. The earth was without form and void, and darkness was over the face of the deep. And the Spirit of God was hovering over the face of the waters. Darkness, without form, chaotic, and there are waters mentioned. The Creator God was over the face of the waters. Now Jesus walks on the water, intending to pass by them and reveal himself in his true nature to the disciples. Wow! They are having an experience like Moses and Elijah. That should make it clear to them that Jesus is not just another rabbi. Look at verse 49. But when they saw him walking on the sea, they thought it was a ghost, and cried out. They thought they were seeing a ghost. You really can't blame them. Some of them were professional fishermen, and none of them had ever seen anyone walk on the surface of the water before. But the one who was passing by them is not like anyone else they have ever known. Look at verse 50. For they all saw him and were terrified. But immediately he spoke to them and said, Take heart, it is I. Do not be afraid. They were terrified, as seems appropriate. And seeing that, Jesus immediately spoke to them. There's that word again. Look carefully at what he said to them. It is two imperative commands with a declaration sandwiched in between. It forms what we call a chiasm. At the heart of it is Jesus' self-declaration, It is I. That forms the center of the sandwich. Now the bread. First, take heart, or have courage. And second, do not be afraid. Or, more accurately, stop being afraid. How can they take heart and stop being afraid? By realizing who is with them. By understanding the identity of Jesus Christ, anointed Messiah, true shepherd of Israel, healer of the sick, who casts out demons, feeds multitudes, and raises little girls from the dead. They can stop being afraid and take courage because they are with Jesus. When they were alone in the boat, they were sheep without a shepherd. But not now. Look at verses 51 and 52. And he got into the boat with them, and the wind ceased. And they were utterly astounded, for they did not understand about the loaves, but their hearts were hardened. When Jesus entered the boat, the wind that was in opposition to them all night ceased. Mark tells us that they were utterly astounded. Why were they astounded? Mark says, because they didn't understand about the loaves. If you go back and watch the previous video, you'll see that the miracle of the loaves was a revelation of Jesus as the true shepherd of Israel, another messianic title from Isaiah 53. And then he says, but their hearts were hardened. In Greek, it literally says, rather, or instead, their hearts were hardened. So not understanding about the loaves and having hardened hearts are two sides of the same coin. So what? Why does that matter? This is more Moses and the Exodus language. When Moses led the Israelites in the wilderness, and they were in a desert place with no food, God provided bread from heaven. Sound familiar? But the people's hearts were hardened, and they took the bread for granted. The disciples didn't understand the loaves, even though they knew that there had only been 5 loaves, and they themselves served over 5,000 people, and in the end, they themselves collected 12 baskets of leftovers, but they still weren't clear about who they were following. They served the bread that Jesus provided, but they missed the lesson. But Mark didn't miss the lesson. Mark shows us that in the night, in danger, darkness, and chaos, when the disciples were weakened and exhausted, Jesus stood above the chaos and was passing by them as a revelation of his true nature, so that they could take heart, stop being afraid, and trust in him. So what can we take away from this story for ourselves? Do we see things as they are, or only superficially? Are we experiencing miracles and missing them? Do we remain sheep without a shepherd, rowing against the wind and making no progress? when the one with power over the chaos is revealing himself? Because of who he is, you can take heart and stop being afraid. Let me know what you take away from the story in the comments. In our next video, Jesus returns to the site of the demonic pig massacre. Thank you for watching SoWhatScripture. Please share this video with someone you think would like it.